Brian. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks everyone for coming here. It's an honor to be here. I'm really excited to be here on this panel in this lane, in this company. Andrew Maxwell and Jen Hofer were the first poets I knew in Los Angeles. I remember really the first people I knew in Los Angeles. I remember moving here in 2005 and starting to explore the city with them. Maggie Nelson, who was supposed to be on this panel, but couldn't make it. I just wanted to point out, Maggie and I actually moved here by coincidence at the same time from the same town in Connecticut. We both had been teaching at Wesleyan University, and we both happened to get jobs in Los Angeles at the very same time. And it was very instructive to me in 2005 to see that she immediately adjusted to living in Los Angeles, and I did not. But I took her adjustment as a model. I mean, as I've taken her and her writing as a model in many ways. And over time, I mean, I think maybe a few years ago, I gradually came to see that I have a very good life in Los Angeles, and I've always tried to keep in mind Marcus Aurelius's advice to himself in his notebooks. Let no one, not even yourself, hear you speaking ill of court life, which is a problem for emperors, but also a problem for academics who don't choose the cities that they live in, and are often given to complaining about living in some of the world's great cities. So in that spirit, I want to ask a very old-fashioned question. Because I study the poetry of the English Renaissance, I am tempted to frame my question in these terms. Can you decide to have a Renaissance? In other words, if we decided that we wanted to have a Renaissance in poetry in Los Angeles, how would we go about it? So take for example, the city of Portland. Andrew and I gave a reading in Portland earlier this year, and I had a wonderful time. My sister lives there, and it was wonderful to see her, and I thought that the reading went very well, and I met some interesting poets there. But I was very struck by the fact that in Portland they have good food and they have comfortable lives, and they are not having a Renaissance. And I let me just pause. I want to avoid having my contribution to this event being remembered as some kind of diss on the city of Portland, which is not what I intended. I appreciated their hospitality, and I had a wonderful time. And I'm not saying that there is no poetry in Portland. Clearly there is, and there are poets there. But I also think it is very true that they are not having a Renaissance. And we're not having a Renaissance either. And I grew up in Minneapolis, and there has never been anything like a Renaissance in Minneapolis. But Portland is now, I mean, it seems like a very livable city, and lots of young people are moving there to live bohemian lives, and yet they are definitely not having a Renaissance. Another example, or a counterexample, is Topeka. In Topeka, I mean, let's just look back one generation. Topeka has produced Ann Boyer, Ben Lerner, Cyrus Consul, Kevin Young, Ed Skoog, and Nick Twemlow, and these are just the names that I came up with this morning, and there are, in fact, a number of others, and I'm also limiting it to one generation. Topeka has produced a generation of poets, and it's not an exact comparison, because I mean, these poets are born in Topeka, grew up in Topeka, but they are no longer based on then they moved away. But the comparison tells you something. If you were asked to design a city to generate poets, you might aim for the opposite of Topeka. You might make your design more like Portland, but that seems to be a mistake. Now, I know some of the ingredients that went into the English Renaissance. One of them is the system of humanist education. And I want to point out that for generating poets, it's the grammar school education that was crucial in the English Renaissance, and not the university education. So both Shakespeare and Johnson are products of a grammar school education and not of the university, although Johnson loved the universities and dedicated Volpone to Oxford and Cambridge. Another important ingredient, apparently, is having a female monarch. And I mean, you know, it's not, it isn't, I mean, the precise importance of that is not easy to pin down. I mean, partly Elizabeth's influence seems to be important. I mean, in ways that are easily traced. Philip Sidney had a very productive period when Elizabeth exiled him from court. And so that, I mean, it isn't just her direct positive influence that seems to have generated poetry and poets, but also sometimes her negative influence. That is, some poets seem to have, in ways, reacted against just the fact of female monarchy, and then written a lot of very interesting poetry. A third important ingredient is the dominance of the Southern dialect. In a way, I think, roughly comparable to the dominance of the Tuscan dialect in the Italian Renaissance. And again, I mean, the important that is probably not just the dominance, but something like the context. I mean, so not that everyone is speaking or writing in the same dialect, but that one is enjoying a kind of triumph over other competing dialects. I guess I also want to recall a point that Samuel Johnson made a long time ago. I mean that it's in the preface to the dictionary that it's to the advantage of English letters that there is no English Academy. That there is no single body that makes decisions about standard English. Or that there wasn't, there never has been a single standard for English usage. Okay, so that's, I mean, just a brief list of ingredients, a short recipe for having a Renaissance that worked in England in the 16th century. But this mixture is now inert. That is, it is a closed system for having a Renaissance because it once worked. It's not going to work here now. I mean, actually, I mean, the only argument I can really make here today, or the closest I can come to making an argument, is that there is no known recipe for having a Renaissance. That is to say that we don't know a way of organizing a society that is automatically going to produce excellent art in any genre. So why does it seem as though Topeka could have a Renaissance and Portland could not? Are there possibilities for cultural exchange in Topeka that are lacking in Portland? Perhaps a greater variety of languages, a greater variety of races, and therefore a greater variety of interests. But if Portland truly lacked that variety, would that affect the food as well? Or perhaps it's the food and the comforts that get in the way of more adventurous art. Or think of the Heian court in Japan. Now, their literature derived its authority from older Chinese models, which you'd think would be a recipe for stultification, but apparently not. Their two great geniuses, Murasaki and Shonagon, were educated informally, not the products of an elite system of education. But most astonishing, Murasaki and Shonagon, courtiers at the same court, were not part of the same school, tribe, or movement as poets. They weren't even enemies. I mean, so it's not a case like Strindberg and Ibsen were not part of a movement, but they were enemies, and in that way, that enmity was very productive for their work. Ibsen wrote a lot of his great work under a portrait of Strindberg that he purchased, because he always wanted to have Strindberg's face in view. He was writing against him. But with Murasaki and Shonagon, they just didn't especially like each other, and they didn't pay attention to what the other was writing. Their work was fed by conversations with other, less interesting writers. So, I mean, that's a very interesting case of something that looks like a Renaissance. Clearly, like there's something about the society that is generating these great poets, and it doesn't really have to do with direct exchange between them. But what it does have to do with them, I mean, what exactly is productive in that case is very, very hard to say. It's obvious that there are healthy and unhealthy conditions for art, as there are for living, and it's obvious that they are not the same. As the conditions for good art are different from conditions for good living. And in the case of art, we have no idea what they are.
Mm-hmm.
Mother made me by removing her luminous beauty from one area of her body. Earth, where her foot fell, cooled and hardened around the dent. Impression left by a fingernail in the skin of an apple. I never grew, but more and more of the beauties she had in me dwindled. Teeth seeming to lengthen, showing their roots as the gums recede. Just a piece of mother with all her treasures kept back. On my tongue, the edge of an unpleasant flavor that I instinctively knew to be death. A proud and overprotective parent of the one thing she had invented, she rather enjoyed seeing her blood go about in a different shape. My sweet mother, proud of all that I kept hidden, deeply moved, or merely chewing, I learned early to hear the sound of coughing with unconcern, merely a cut through which you may see a short distance into her face, and that's her mouth, uniformly silver, a cold color in hair, green eyes blanched gray, where I learned to seek happiness in a woman's glance. She burned through the earth when she divided her store of beauties from her substance. The remainder froze, and she froze the remover, as alike as one of the halves of an apple to the other. Could two faces make a third face by friction of one mouth against another? Could one face split into two copies of itself, and I their mirror, now told apart by temperature, or the notch in the ear, or just by pointing? Of luminous beauty, her defining feature absent from your composition, a seemingly casual mention. I looked up from a fiery outline, her face held warring energies in check, sovereign and ecstatic. I would have enjoyed saying that my forehead was hotter than her iron, but truthfully, I guess it wasn't, since the brand left a visible scar. I love women. Second, give him irony. First, a trope, then a sexual fetish, then a government program, because when you long for an object, instead you join a society. Am I lessened by your knowing what I know, loving what I love? There is no reason to think so. Sleep brushed his face, shrouded his doubtful expression. The bold image of a dream played across his eyes, a glimpse of stalking. You merely seek sensation and organize society, supported by clouds, not a hand, then Founders' Day. Am I lessened by your loving a book written by me? Doubtful. He walked into it until his shadow vanished. His shadow he approved, but not his reflection. A bicycle without a lock, then a monthly newsletter. You build community. Did you want something? No tail on this one, just another head, a singing head. Am I lessened by your reading my book? A book can be a thing too many. I must put myself together so carefully that when you take me apart, the parts detach in the correct order. When you fetishize an object, you become a member of a community. As far as I am concerned, they are not mirrors. Am I lessened by your love? No. Only the regret of causing somebody pain, not guaranteed against acid burns. Recall the indelible rule of commerce. You want an object, but you are going to get community. And by my love am I less? You are lying. You are a statement, not a question. Third, one of the most beautiful sights in the modern world is the view of a city from a night flight. The headlights of someone's car floating forward on a quiet street. Small fires of an encamped army. When the coolant flows over hot steel and steam billows from the top of the tower. In sleep, a quantity gushes out. Your eyes shut. You think you are closing the shop. Pretend to notice mistakes no one could ever hear. Your vessel always leaking a little. Smoke ascending from a cigarette. Sleep is the quantity that you release. Awake, you are holding the outside of a ceramic cup when it's hot, filled with hot tea that you can just stand to pick up. When going to sleep, being run over by a bus, stick of gum in the prime of its stickiness, cake of soap cleans, is clean because it constantly sloughs its surface and renews itself. The shower, greatest pleasure and governing principle of my life, my love, a thing outside me, not a feeling, more concrete than a feeling. Fourth, you are always honest. I try to be honest. I mean, it's a constant struggle. I lie sometimes, but I do not invent. How is this possible to do? Thinking wishfully is the force behind all falsehood. To live securely, Aaron rents and sells furniture, his name traduced. Everywhere he sees, Aaron takes advantage of the poor, finds himself sitting in a room for the same reason an evil spirit shows up in a circle. What do I think happened? I think he offered them deals. He conjured them to appear by offering to grant the wishes of their thoughts. He offered respect. He offered to stop being an obstacle. He offered me, or he offered to replace me. Because how do you conjure a spirit? Just like catching a fish, and even his name has been used as one of the baits, because how do you control a spirit? Just like a spirit controls you, temptation, the thought of what you wish for causes you to appear and intervene, because you can't name the actual object of your thought, which tempts you. You have to tell a lie, naming a possible object no one could want. Wishful thinking is the most powerful force in the world. Thank you.